Boldwood presents Brothers of the Sword, written by Peter Gibbons and read by Sean Barrett. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood.
Et wa hissa hwana hos forlatan, feor afison, and forthgangan, higan to handum and to higa bodum. Then he commanded each of his men to release their horses, drive them away, and go forth, to think on the work at hand and their firm resolve. An excerpt from the Battle of Maldon, an Anglo-Saxon poem written to celebrate the battle fought at Maldon in 991 AD. Prologue, 991 AD, Folkestone. The Ormurun Lange, the Long Serpent, was a beautiful ship, a drakkar warship built in the east, far from where she sat now in the fish-stinking harbour at Folkestone on England's south coast. Skilled shipwrights had cut her keel from a single piece of oak, and each of her clinker overlaying planks was carved from wood sourced in the same dark, ancient forests along the banks of Lake Ladoga and the great river which led Vikings south through treacherous waters to far Novgorod and Kiev. She held 30 oars, and it had taken 4 women an entire year to weave her heavy woolen sail. Olaf Tryggvason stood in her prow, and he ran a hand along her smooth sheer strake, the topmost plank from which his picked champions would hang their shields of linden wood when the ship sailed to war. Olaf smiled as the sea lapped at her hull in gentle waves, and he looked eastwards, beyond Folkestone's harbour, and out to where the grey-green water met the pale blue sky. White-tipped waves rose and fell, and gulls cawed overhead, as Olaf remembered the glorious day on the banks of a gleaming river Volkhov, when Vladimir the Great of Kiev had gifted him the ship in thanks for his service, back when Olaf was the captain of Vladimir's army. That was in the days when Olaf's star rose, when the Norns cackled at his dreams from the base of the great tree Yggdrasil, whose branches held the realms of gods, dwarves, Nithing wraiths, and men. Those 3 terrible sisters twisted the threads of men's fates together like so much twine, and they had spun a shining thread for Olaf to raise him up from nothing into a great and powerful warlord. "Why are you smiling, lord?" asked Kjetilmund, the burly shipmaster of the Ormurun Lange. "Because spring has come," said Olaf, tearing his mind away from memories of glorious Kiev, Novgorod, and which means we can leave this place and get back to sea." "What is our heading, lord?" asked Kjetilmund, and then raised his gnarled hands in apology, hands that had hefted ship's ropes for 20 years or more. "I only ask so that I can relay the orders to your captains. We have 50 ships, lord, and our heading must be clear so that we do not lose any. It is spring, but Njord can still surprise us with a fierce storm to blow us out to sea. Before we know it, it will push stragglers to Francia, and we will lose both ships and men." Olaf nodded. He continued to pass his hand along the smooth wood, along where the sheer strake turned upwards into the prow, its curve as smooth as a woman's hip. That prow reared up and snarled out towards the whale road, a great spitting serpent with fangs and a forked tongue, with furious eyes to fear. It was Viking custom to remove the beast heads from their warships close to land, so as not to frighten the spirits there. But the ship faced out to sea, and, where Olaf was heading, he wanted men frightened. "We head north around the coast, and we stay in England for the summer," said Olaf. He had decided that, over the long winter, holed up inside a poor hall in Folkestone's town, huddled in fleeces beside the fire. His hall in Kiev had been magnificent, with enough feasting benches to hold 100 men, luxurious furs for warmth, and a hearth fire to warm Valhalla itself. He had debated the merits of leaving England with the captains of his famed Jomsviking warriors and with his Norse jarls, the powerful earls of Norway and Denmark, who had brought their ships to join with Olaf's battle luck and build their reputation and wealth. "I will pass on the message, lord," said Kjetilmund, before weaving his way along the deck,
ducking beneath seal-hide rigging and around shuffling warriors who brought aboard their sea chests, which doubled up as rowing benches. Beyond the Umbran smaller Drakkar warships crammed into the harbour with so many masts that it looked like a great winter forest stripped of leaves. Captains bellowed at each other to keep their distance, using oar shafts to keep the precious hulls from clashing into one another as they prepared to depart from Folkestone. Hull timbers creaked, men bawled orders and protests at one another as they loaded barrels of dried fish, freshly brewed ale, oats, and smoked meat aboard the fleet to keep the warriors fed. "Are you sure you want to stay here?" said a voice with the harsh twang of a Svear man from the north of the Russ coast. Olaf shrugged. "We have unfinished work here, Bursleif. I'm not done with the Saxons yet." "We could push north, get you back to Norway, and fight for your title," said Bursleif. He was a stocky, slab-faced captain of the Vikings, a brotherhood of warriors trained to fight from the time they could walk within the walls of Jomsburg, a walled town in the cold north, the way of the warrior. "There'll be time to go north, but we cannot leave Palnatoke unavenged, and we need more men and more silver if I am to become king of Viking like my father, or king of all Norway like my great-grandfather, Harald Fairhair." Palnatoke had been the leader of the Viking order of warriors, a man who had been as father to Olaf until the Saxons had cut him down. "I miss Palnatoke as much as you, and I hate that big Saxon bastard who killed him. But he died like a warrior, and waits for us in Valhalla, in Odin's hall, drinking ale from curved horns beneath its roof, made from the mightiest of shields. The Saxons paid us all they could scrape together last year. Their gentle king listened to his black-robed Christ crows and paid us not to fight. So let's get our silver somewhere else. I don't trust the weird of this place. There is ill luck in their nailed god, and we have likely bled the place dry of silver already," said Bursleif. Olaf laughed, but part of him believed what men said of the power of the nailed god. He was not a god for warriors, not like Odin, Thor, or Tur. He was a god who demanded service, who taught his worshippers of peace and forgiveness. But he also brought the Saxons victory, which spoke of his strength. Olaf shivered with rage as he recalled how Byrhtnoth, the baleful and vicious Saxon warrior, had almost cut him down, and the thunder of hoofbeats as the Saxon cavalry snatched his victory away and forced him to accept King Aethelred's payment for peace. "I make my own weird, Bursleif. I'm the son of a king, but yet my earliest memories are of living as a slave in the distant east, driven from our kingdom by usurpers and forced to live like a pig by that bastard, Clercon, who sold my mother and I into a horror of suffering and servitude. You have heard the warp of my life 100 times, of how my uncle Sigurd found me there and brought me to Vladimir in Novgorod. All men know that when I was still but a stripling pup, I found Clercon and buried my axe in his skull. I rose from the shit of a pig pen to where I am now, the Jarl and leader of a fleet of 50 warships. If I can't defeat these cursed Saxons, how can I retake my kingdom in Norway? We must have a victory here. We must defeat their warriors, this Ealdorman, or whatever title they give to Byrhtnoth and his champion Byrhtnoth. They almost killed us last year, but this year we must leave with our hulls buoyed with victory and the bilges of our ships heavy with coin. I need to buy more crews and bring more jarls to my war banner if I am to reconquer my father's kingdom. You say their king listened to his black crows and paid us silver for peace. I say that is because he is weak. If we sail east or north, we must fight strong kings in Francia or savage jarls in Norway or Denmark. There is more wealth here in Saxon churches and towns, and this king, Aethelred, does not have the strength to stop us. So we stay in England, then? We do. And we take our axes and our spears, and we make them suffer. We bring them to battle, and we take everything from them, their silver, their pride, and their lives. You could be king here, Olaf. Seems to me it would be easier to kill this king, Aethelred, than it would be to fight an army of Norsemen for the throne of Viking. We could sail our fleet up the River Thames and take Lundenburg, and from there march on to Winchester? These Saxons have one king, but you need only defeat the warriors in his southern lands of Wessex and Essex. By the time his men in distant Northumbria, or even Mercia, know we have attacked, the war would be over. It would take months for the Saxon king to raise an army from his entire kingdom." "Perhaps," said Olaf with a shrug. "But first I want this Essex to burn. I want the warriors of this shire to feel our wrath outside of their own homes. I want their warriors to bleed in their own fields and rivers. They must suffer for the humiliation I suffered last year. There must be a victory here, and then who knows what next? A kingdom to be won with the silver we can rip from the Saxon dogs and their puny king?" A tall man in a white robe stalked down the Ormerinlangi's deck. He wore his long silver hair unbound, and his beard was the colour of an old cauldron. The tall man frowned at the sailors, who shrank from him, for he was a Seidman, or what the Saxons would call a priest of the Asgard gods. In his right hand he clutched a dagger with a wickedly curved blade, and a hilt curved into the shape of a raven's head with an open beak. Behind him 2 warriors heaved a pitiful figure in their brawny arms, their limbs strengthened from hauling an oar across the surging dangers of the whale road. The figure bucked and wailed in their grip, his face a swollen mass of purple swelling. The Seidman stopped a pace away from Olaf and raised his arms to the sky, thin fingers clawing towards Asgard. His eyes turned in on themselves and showed only white, the colour of his dagger's hilt. "Odin, hear me," the tall man rumbled in a voice as deep and foreboding as a bear's winter cave. "With this offering, bring your loyal son, Olaf, victory. Send your ravens, Hugin and Munin, to watch his deeds, to witness how he fights and strives for great. He can take his place amongst your Herjar, to fight alongside you on the inexorable day of Ragnarök." Olaf bowed his head in solemn respect and found that he was clutching the silver hammer amulet at his neck. It was a Mjolnir pendant in honour of the god Thor. Whilst Olaf had always believed that he had forged his own luck, had clawed his own way up from the slave pens, the favour of the gods was not something to be taken lightly or ignored. There was powerful Seder magic in the gods' power. Warriors believed in it, fought harder when they felt Odin was on their side. So Olaf knelt before the Seidman and clenched his teeth as the 2 warriors pushed the bruised smaller man to the deck before the tall, grey-haired Odin priest. The man was a Saxon slave, a young, thin man with a wispy beard and large hazel eyes full of fear. He wept and begged, writhing on the deck timbers like a landed fish. The pitiless Seidman grabbed a fistful of the Saxon's hair and yanked his head back, and in one fluid motion he whipped his wicked knife across the man's throat. The slave twitched and jerked in the Seidman's grip, and fiery blood spurted from the terrible wound in his neck and splashed across Olaf's face in a hot slap. Olaf resisted the urge to recoil from that blood, and he grinned, the iron taste of it bitter in his mouth, because the blood had struck in the right place, and, therefore, the omens were good. The men saw they were good, and that would give them confidence. Viking gods did not demand their followers act with forgiveness or live in peace and never-ending prayer. They craved war and bravery, rewarded valor and weapon skill. They were unforgiving and vengeful gods, and Olaf prayed that Odin and Thor saw him, and that they would bring battle luck to his campaign against the East Saxons. Chapter 1. Byrhtnoth coughed at his dripping nose, and breath streamed from his mouth like a cloud of dragon smoke. A robin danced across frost-dusted grass amongst fallen, twisted leaves. Its small black eyes watched Byrhtnoth and his men, its head jerking from side to side, as though it judged them for what they were about to do. Behind him a horse whinnied, and the bird flew away, fearful of the beasts and the plumes of air billowing from their nostrils in the cold. Byrhtnoth stroked his horse's powerful neck and leant forward to scratch its ear. The leather saddle creaked as he moved, and he rested his hand on the pommel of his sword. The bird was wrong to fear the horses. It was the men astride them who were the killers. "Are you sure he's here?" asked Alwina of Foxfield, his green eyes shining in the bright spring morning. "He's here," said Beornoth, shrugging his shoulders to bring his thick. It covered the iron rings of his byrny chainmail coat of armour and kept out the worst of the chill. "Let's get it done, then," grumbled Wulfhere. His hulking frame shivered where he sat upon his roan mare, and the bald warrior wore a hood over his scarred head. "I'm bloody freezing." "We are here on the orders of the king," said Leosuno-Sturma, a lopsided smile splitting his ugly face. "And the royal embrace should warm king's thanes even on days like this." Wulfhere grumbled to himself, for he was not a thane like most of Beornoth's riders. Wulfhere was a warrior of Beornoth's hearth troop, but Byrhtnoth, Leosuno, Alfwine, and the rest of the 30 men gathered at the forest's frosty edge were Saxon thanes of Essex, sworn to serve their ealdorman Byrhtnoth. The ealdorman was in favour with the king, Aethelred, after years of fighting and killing Vikings, and it was in the name of the king that Byrhtnoth rode out when frost shrouded the country in its icy blanket, and the swallows and wagtails had not yet returned from their winter homes. He should be at home, in Brannock's tree, by the fire on such a day, but the king had ordered him to ride north and punish a traitor. The ride from Brannock's tree to Bocking had taken only a day and a half, and the king had received word that the traitor, Aethelred, had returned to his lands to visit his family, and so Byrhtnoth and his men rode northeast. Aethelred was thane at Bocking in the Shire of Essex, and was one of several Saxon thanes who had welcomed the Danish war king Sweyn Forkbeard to England's shores the previous summer. The rest cowered under the protection of the Danish overlord. Most were thanes in East Anglia itself, but Aethelred was an Essex thane, a man sworn to serve ealdorman Byrhtnoth and King Aethelred. An oath-breaker and turncloak, a man who must be brought to justice. Sweyn had brought his army of Viking warriors and his beast-proud dragon ships across the whale road from Denmark and found succour in East Anglia from men such as Aethelred, who, although Saxon nobles, were descendants of Viking blood. The Danelaw, a vast swathe of England running north of Watling Street, had only returned to Saxon rule in recent years, after living under Viking rule for over 100 summers. The king wanted every treacherous thane punished, but to ride into Sweyn's lair and kill them was no simple matter. Yet Aethelred had shown himself, no doubt come to check on his lands, retrieve his family and whatever silver he had hoarded away, before ealdorman Byrhtnoth confiscated his lands, his heriot of estates, war gear, and wealth, as punishment for his crimes. "Do you have the proclamation?" asked Alfwine. "I have it," replied Byrhtnoth. The stiff piece of paper covered with monk's scratchings and a thick red dollop of wax imprinted with the king's seal lay tucked in Byrhtnoth's saddlebag. "Why want the return of the cursed heathens?" said Wulfhere, blowing into his hands and rubbing them together. "It's beyond me." "For many, the church here is a foul and greedy overlord, exempt from taxes, swallowing up men's land by royal decree. Fine mills and farmland taken from monasteries and ruled over by fat monks and bishops. For some, Viking rule was fairer," said Alfwine. "Aye, until they take an axe to your family and burn your hall with you in it," said Leosuno, and the warriors chuckled. "It's time," said Byrhtnoth. He dug his heels into his horse's flanks and clicked his tongue. "Spear." Quicker, his young face ruddy-cheeked from the cold, reached over with Byrhtnoth's ask spear. Byrhtnoth took the smooth shaft in his right hand, its broad-leafed blade gleaming in the morning sun, which shone bright despite the cold. His horse ambled from the tree line, frozen leaves crunching under its heavy hooves. Byrhtnoth's men followed from the bare branches and brush, which curled and twisted like the frozen fingers of an ancient Jotun giant. Bocking was a collection of thatched wattle buildings with a high gate and a timber church surrounded by a wooden wall. It was the home of a thegn, a warrior lord who held at least 5 hides, or farms, from his ealdorman, in return for his duty to fight for that ealdorman whenever he called. It was, Byrhtnoth thought, not dissimilar to his own home at Brannock's Tree. Smoke floated up from roof holes to sit heavily above the dwelling and then disappeared into the pale blue sky. It was a still spring morning with no wind, as crisp as the ice on a frozen water barrel. Behind the walls a dog barked, and a small child wailed for its mother. The people inside would wake up to reach for whatever food they had left in their winter stores to break their fasts with bread or milk from animals brought into the living quarters for winter warmth. They would be warm and safe, and unaware of the warriors at their gate. Byrhtnoth pulled gently on his reins when he came 10 paces before the walls. The entrance to the small holding was double-gated, below a high turret, and barred from the inside. There were no guards or sentries on the walls. Byrhtnoth sighed. "Quicker, Carry," he barked to his 2 youngest warriors. "Yes, Lord," they both said at the same time. "Go up there, climb over the gate and open it." "But, Lord," said Carry, his words halting, not wanting to question his superior, "won't they hurt us if we do?" "Do you see any warriors on the walls?" "No, Lord." "So, how can they hurt you?" "Yes, Lord." Carry urged his horse out of the line, and followed by Quicker, he cantered towards the gate. Quicker held Carry's horse steady, and the tousle-haired lad stood up gingerly on his saddle. He reached his hands up to the timber wall and hauled himself over, disappearing behind the dark timber palisade in a flurry of arms and legs. "Hard to believe there are no sentries," said Wulfhere, shaking his head. "Especially with a traitor at home. You would think the bastard would be nervous," said Leofsuno. "He will be," said Byrhtnoth. Moments later the gate swung open, and Carry stood in the open space. The bracing spar rested in his hand, and Carry waved at Byrhtnoth, a grin splitting his beardless face. Byrhtnoth urged his horse on and rode through the open gate, followed by the rest of his horsemen. Their hooves clattered noisily on the frozen mud inside the walls, and a woman stood before them carrying a bucket of water from a nearby well. She dropped the water, a hand rising to cover her mouth in alarm. "Aethelred of Bucking!" Byrhtnoth shouted. His voice was loud and deep, carrying on the cold air like the roar of a stag. A clatter of hastily moved furniture came from a high gabled building, and mumbled voices hid behind closed doors. "Aethelred of Bucking!" Byrhtnoth shouted again. "I come in the name of the king. Show yourself!" A priest in a faded smock tied at the waist with a cracked leather belt slid from a side door. He was portly, and the tonsure on his head grown long into a see-through fuzz. The priest raised a hand in greeting and made the sign of the cross. "Hello, noble warriors," said the priest, his voice high-pitched and stuttering. "Welcome to Bucking. How can we be of service?" "Get Aethelred," Byrhtnoth said, a frown creasing the scarred crag of his face. "Regretfully, Lord Aethelred is not here. The Lady Leofwyn is in residence, and I am here in the service of the Lord. It is the 3rd hour. Are you here to make your terse prayers?" "I don't follow the liturgy of the hours, priest. I know Aethelred is here, so either he comes out or I go in and get him." The priest's head snapped back as though Byrhtnoth had slapped him. "You do not make your prayers? What kind of a man—" "Aethelred!" Byrhtnoth roared, and the priest took a step back, wincing at the anger in his voice. Byrhtnoth levelled his spear at the main building, and his horse's forelegs scraped at the frozen earth and shook its head skittish beneath Byrhtnoth's fury. "How dare you ride in here, unannounced and uninvited?" came a voice from across the courtyard. Byrhtnoth turned to see a line of 10 warriors, 2 of them wearing knee-length byrnie coats of mail and all armed with spears and axes. Said Alfwine. They were the Thane's men, warriors he had armed and kept within his house to help fulfill his duties as the protector of his lands. "We come from the king in search of the traitor Aethelred of Bucking, a man who sides with Danes, with Viking murderers and rapists, and invites them onto our land. Are you Aethelred?" Byrhtnoth said, pointing his spear at the warrior who had spoken. He was a big man, his mail polished, his black hair pulled back from his face and tied at the nape of his neck, and over his lip was a long, drooping moustache. "No, I am not the Thegn," said the warrior, and smirked over his shoulder at the warriors behind him. "Then you will die for him," said Byrhtnoth. He was tired of asking, and was not a man known for his patience. He slipped down from his saddle and marched towards the line of warriors. "Byrhtnoth, wait," said Godric, a young Thegn who rode with Byrhtnoth, but he ignored the plea. The warrior with the moustache turned his smirk to Byrhtnoth, but it quickly faded as Byrhtnoth's arm drew back and he flung his spear. He grunted with the effort and kept striding forward, dragging his sword free from its fleece-lined scabbard, the cold metal scraping on the scabbard's wooden throat. The warrior swayed aside, and the spear flew past him to thud into the chest of the man behind. The power in the throw snatched the warrior from his feet, and he fell sprawling onto the frost-dusted grass. Blood spilled in the bright morning, thick and dark on the hoarfrost, and suddenly Bocking erupted into a maelstrom of shouting and screaming. "Wait, wait," said the moustached warrior, hastily holding up his hands in peace and shuffling away. Byrhtnoth took a long stride forward with a speed that belied his size, and plunged the tip of his sword into the warrior's gullet. The moustached man's eyes went wide with surprise at the pain, and at how fast the situation had deteriorated into deadly violence. "Too late for that," said Wulfhere, who had leapt from his horse and ran past Byrhtnoth with a long-handled war-axe held in both hands. Wulfhere blocked a spear thrust from a stocky Bocking fighter, and back-cut his bearded axe-blade into the warrior's shoulder with a wet thud. "Lord, help us! Protect us, O God!" the priest wailed, falling to his knees and clutching the cross around his neck. "There is no God here, priest. Only the king's justice for a man who invited Vikings to our lands." Byrhtnoth snarled as he marched past him, the tip of his sword dripping blood. The clang of iron and the shouting of Bocking's hearth troop subsided as Leosuno and Alfwine joined the fray, and with 3 men down, Aethelred's warriors threw down their arms in surrender. Bocking's Thegn, Aethelred, had still not shown himself, and Byrhtnoth was tired of waiting. The blood fury was on him, and he crashed a heavy boot into the main hall's door, flinging the heavy oak timbers back on their dark iron hinges. Byrhtnoth marched into the gloom, where a fire roared in the central hearth, and tendrils of smoke. The place smelled of animals, of sweat, and boiled vegetables. Pale faces cowered from him in the corners, a pot left boiling over the fire as folk shrank back from the huge, vengeful warrior who had stormed into their home. "Where is he?" Byrhtnoth said, raising his blood-soaked sword to a gap-toothed man in a brown, rough-spun jerkin. The sword wasn't just a weapon. It was a warning to Byrhtnoth's enemies. It was an expensive weapon, just as rare as the chain-mail byrnie he wore. It spoke of a successful warrior, a man strong and deadly enough to hold sword and mail in battle when others would try to rip them from him. It spoke of a man who protected his people from their enemies with his brutality and war skill. The sword told men to be wary that its welder was not to be trifled with. He was to be respected and feared. The gap-toothed man pointed a shaking finger toward the shadows at the back of the hall. Byrhtnoth marched through the old floor rushes, which were dank and soaked from a winter's full of spillages. There was a small door on the rear wall, and Byrhtnoth smashed it open with a kick without even breaking stride. There, in a candle-lit room, window shutters closed and an unmade bed, was Aethelred of Bocking. He was a tall, thin man with a balding head of black hair run through with silver. Aethelred had a lugubrious face and a close-cropped beard. He stood before a stout woman in her nightdress, who wailed and hid her face behind hands thick with rings. Aethelred held a sax before him, its broken-back blade wavering and his face drawn and pale. "How dare you enter my home like this? I am a Thegn of—" said Aethelred, his jowls trembling as he spoke. "How dare you provide aid to Sweyn Forkbeard, war king of the Danes, a Viking who had brought blood and death to our lands? I fought his man Ragnar the Flair last year, and he slaughtered our people, raped them and enslaved them." Byrhtnoth spoke evenly, staring deep into the Thane's eyes. "I am Byrhtnoth of Brannock's Tree, here on the order of the king to bring you to justice." Byrhtnoth pulled a crumpled roll of parchment, which contained the king's decree in spidery scroll, and tossed it at Aethelred's feet. He batted the Sax away contemptuously with his bloodied sword, and grabbed Aethelred by the scruff of his neck. Aethelred grabbed at Byrhtnoth's huge paw, calloused from use of sword and spear, but he was like a child toying with its father, and Byrhtnoth dragged him into a savage headbutt. Aethelred's nose mashed against Byrhtnoth's forehead with a crunch, and the Thegn went limp. Byrhtnoth dragged him out of the chamber and into his hall, the lady Leofwin running behind him, screeching in horror. Byrhtnoth threw Aethelred through the open doors of his own hall, so that the Thegn fell sprawling onto the frozen mud. "Not here, is he?" Byrhtnoth snarled at the priest, who still cowered with his cross clutched in soft hands. "Aethelred of Bucking!" he shouted, loud enough for all the settlement to hear. "I am here to punish you as a traitor to the king and your people. Let all witness the king's justice for those who have lost their lives at the hands of Viking raiders." Byrhtnoth marched to Aethelred and grabbed a fistful of his thinning hair. He dragged the Thegn, who coughed and spluttered as he stumbled behind him, to the palisade gateway, where Wulfhere was fixing a length of rope across the gate's crossbeam. Byrhtnoth grabbed that rope and looped it around Aethelred's neck. Aethelred shook his head and wept, spittle flecking from his lips into his beard. Byrhtnoth handed the rope to Wulfhere, and the big warrior hauled Aethelred up to hang on the rope, his thin legs kicking in the wintry morning air. Wulfhere tied the rope off, and they mounted their horses. "Burn the hall," Byrhtnoth snarled. Quicker and Kari ran into the hall, and emerged moments later with burning timbers from the hearth fire. They tossed the timbers into the dry, cold thatch, and mounted their horses. Byrhtnoth sheathed his sword and led his riders out of Bucking's gate and towards home. He left Lady Leofwin on her knees, sobbing beneath the body of her hanged husband and the burning hall of a traitor. Byrhtnoth hoped that the simple folk who had suffered at the hands of Ragnar, Sweyn, and their Viking killers would hear what he had done. Many had suffered and died last summer, people Aethelred should have protected. He was their vengeance, their strong hand against vicious enemies who had put them to the sword. He was Byrhtnoth, Thegn of Essex. He recalled all that he had witnessed when the Vikings had raided East Anglia, the flayed skins of honest Saxons used for shield covers, the slaves shackled in pens to be sold in the slave markets of Dublin or Hedeby. Byrhtnoth remembered his own dead children, slaughtered by Vikings years ago, and he felt no pity for Aethelred. He felt rage, and he craved vengeance on the hated Viking invaders. His hate for them was insatiable. Chapter 2. "This place is beautiful," said Quicker, scampering to keep up with Byrhtnoth's long strides. "It's the Ealdorman's horse-breeding farm," said Offa. "Many of the Shire's finest war horses were born and trained here. Maybe the king is here for a horse?" Offa was Byrhtnoth's captain, and commanded the Ealdorman's hearth troop, much as Wulfhere was the captain of Byrhtnoth's own warriors. Byrhtnoth liked the old fighter. Byrhtnoth had met Offa when he had first sworn his oath to Byrhtnoth, and they had fought side by side many times since. Offa had a reputation as a steady sword, and had been a Thegn in Byrhtnoth's household. He had a long grey beard, and although the hearth troop looked to Byrhtnoth to lead when it came to battle, Offa was their commander. "What need would the king have for a war horse?" said Leofsunu, and the rest of the group sucked in a sharp intake of breath at that cutting truth. They had left their horses at the huddle of buildings and stables, which made up Ealdorman Byrhtnoth's sprawling horse farm and breeding stud. The Ealdorman's steward had greeted the band of Thanes on arrival, ordered for their mounts to be cared for, and then pointed up to the distant green fields, where the Ealdorman and King Aethelred had gone to spend the morning hawking. The king's guard of warriors lolled around the stables, big men in byrnies, leaning on spears adorned with triangular pennants daubed with the king's writhing dragon banner of Wessex. They eyed Byrhtnoth and his riders with indifference as he marched past, but Leofsunu scampered over to grasp the forearm of a warrior he knew, and the rest of Aethelred's warriors welcomed him warmly. Leofsunu was the ugliest man Byrhtnoth had ever seen, but he was a stout fighter, and men liked his easy humour, so he was ever popular. He was also the Thegn of Sturma, prosperous and fertile lands in Essex.
Byrhtnoth strolled across the pasture where a fine white mare cantered around in a circle, her muscled legs and neck shifting as she moved, and her pale mane flowed behind her. A fresh breeze drifted across a wide pasture at the bottom of the wooded valley, cold on Byrhtnoth's neck and face. It had been 2 days since he had left Woking, and Byrhtnoth's legs ached from the hard ride, and he yearned to return home to Brannock's tree. "I wish I had my own birds with me," said Alfrina cheerfully. "There is good hawking to be had at Foxfield. Perhaps not fit for a king, but there is game there, Beor." "You will be back in your home at Foxfield soon. Our work should be over now until summer," said Byrhtnoth. It was unusual for warriors to be called out to fight so early in the year, before there was proper fodder for horses and when provisions were light. But news had come of Aethelred's return to Woking from East Anglia, where he had hidden in safety with the Danes, and the king had summoned Byrhtnoth to punish the traitor. "Hail, lads!" called Leofsuno cheerfully, 2 sloshing aleskins tucked under his arms, and a loaf of bread in each hand. "You are more resourceful than you look, Leofsuno, I'll give you that," said Wulfhere, gleefully grabbing a skin of ale and taking a long drink from its stoppered end. "We should let the men stay. You, Offa, and I will go to the Ealdorman," said Byrhtnoth, and Alfrina nodded. Offa ordered the men back to the buildings to enjoy their food and drink, and the 3 thanes continued across the pasture, the dew-wet grass soaking through Byrhtnoth's leather boots as he walked. "The elder," said Offa. "Now that he is free of his mother's shadow, Aethelred can find his own advisers, and who better than Byrhtnoth?" said Alfrina. "The old crone would choke on her soup if she knew," said Offa, his lined face creased by a grin. Byrhtnoth and Alfrina laughed. The king's mother was notoriously famous for her deep cunning and plotting. She had killed old King Edgar's heir, Edward, to put her and Edgar's son, Aethelred, on the throne when he was only 12 years old. And she had ruled the kingdom from behind the throne from that day until last year. She had tried to have Byrhtnoth and Byrhtnoth killed, a plot which they had uncovered, and which had seen her banished to a nunnery. "Hopefully the king is here to discuss how to rid ourselves of the Vikings," said Byrhtnoth. "Olaf has been at Folkestone all winter. He's been nice and quiet, kept inside the town, no raiding," said Alfrina. "So he should be, with all that silver the bishops gave him last year," Offa spat. Byrhtnoth had sent scouts to watch Olaf Tryggvason through the winter, and he had behaved himself, even though he remained on English soil despite his defeat. Olaf was a Norseman and leader of the Vikings. He had led an army of Vikings in raids across England's southeast coast the previous summer, and there had been hard fighting to keep his savage warriors at bay, but not so deep enough a victory to force Olaf to sail away across the sea to find another kingdom to attack. "Which is why they will always keep coming," said Byrhtnoth, shaking his head. "The Northmen crave land like this, lush and fertile. They hunger for our land and our silver. They wanted enough to sail their warships across treacherous seas and risk their lives to get it. If we keep paying them, then we give them what they want." "More will come," agreed Offa. "And now we have Sweyn Forkbeard of the Danes with his army in East Anglia, and Olaf in Folkestone, 2 packs of wolves sleeping peacefully over winter, but sure to wake up snarling and hungry once the frosts melt," said Byrhtnoth. A wide-winged kestrel soared overhead, its deep black eyes searching the meadow for prey. It seemed to rest in the air, floating there like a ship at sea. Byrhtnoth felt its cold eyes upon him. It was a predator, a hunter of rodents, and he offered the bird a salute as the king's party came into view beyond a small hill, and before a copse where bright green leaves budded on spindly branches. "Ah, our brave warriors, return from the field!" bellowed Byrhtnoth as he saw the 3 thanes approach. The Ealdorman was enormous and towered over the surrounding men. His great grey spade of a beard moved as he spoke, and he raised a hand in greeting. "Was the bastard there?" "He was there," said Offa, and quickly dropped to one knee as the king himself emerged from Byrhtnoth's shadow, a hooded sparrowhawk resting on. Its hood was tan-brown and covered its head, save for its golden curved beak. Its talons shifted on the glove, and its hunter's head twitched from side to side.
Byrhtnoth and Alfwine also dropped to one knee and bowed their heads. "Rise, please," said the king. Aethelred was young and thin. He wore a worn leather hunting jerkin with knee-high boots. The king had long auburn hair, which caught the sun when he moved, and his face was long and lantern-jawed. "So the traitor Aethelric returned to his nest?" He stared at Byrhtnoth. "Yes, lord. We've come straight from Bucking to bring news of it to Lord Byrhtnoth," said Byrhtnoth. "And did you dispense the crown's justice?" "Yes, lord." "Details, man," said the king. He grimaced at the weight of the sparrowhawk and passed the bird to one of his huntsmen. "I want to know what happened." "Byrhtnoth dragged Aethelric out of his house and hanged him from Bucking's gate," said Alfwine. "We killed some of Aethelric's oathmen and burned his hall." "Good," said the king, and clasped his hands together. "Now men will know what happens when they side with the heathen over our own people, over their own king. Men should fear the king, and we should have warriors every bit as fearsome as the Vikings themselves." "Lucky for us we have Beor, then," said Byrhtnoth. "Quite so," said Aethelred, and he exchanged a furtive glance with Byrhtnoth. "You have served well, Byrhtnoth, Thegn. We will need your sword again this year, I fear, if we are to shake these cursed Vikings off our shores, along with the traitors who give them aid." There had to be more fighting once spring warmed the fields and forests of Aethelred's England. The Vikings would be hungry for silver, war, and food, and Byrhtnoth would need to bring his sword and his savagery to protect the sheep from the wolves. The wounds he had suffered fighting Olaf and his supremely skilled and organized Jomsvikings had healed during the winter, and as much as Byrhtnoth wanted to return to Brannock's Tree to be with his wife Eowyn and rest with her in the sun, he knew his duty, and he knew what he was. "Ah!" exclaimed the king, smiling and pointing over Byrhtnoth's shoulder. "Your kestrel has struck, Lord Byrhtnoth." Byrhtnoth turned, and the bird of prey swooped away from a line of hedge which separated one field from another. A small mouse dangled from its sharp talons as it beat its wings and flew towards the pale blue sky. "Go, get some food in the house, Beor. Meet me at the stables at noon," said Byrhtnoth, and he turned back to the king. The two great lords of Saxon England walked and talked together amongst their woodsmen, hawks, and the barks of their hunting dogs. Byrhtnoth sat on a milking stool. Their stink filled his nose, mixed with the shit and filth piled in a far corner by the stable boys who tended Byrhtnoth's herd. The hay was the remnants of the summer harvest, dwindled to almost nothing now, having fed the fine horses across the cold winter months. He drank cool milk from a tankard kindly provided by Byrhtnoth's steward when Byrhtnoth refused the offer of ale. Byrhtnoth had once succumbed to drink in the dark times, and these days he did not touch a drop. Byrhtnoth strode into the stable courtyard. He walked on the balls of his feet, despite his age. He was tall and broad-shouldered, and strode with a fighter's gait, smooth and well-balanced. "Byrhtnoth, welcome," said the ealdorman. Byrhtnoth smiled. Byrhtnoth was a good lord. He had rewarded Byrhtnoth with a heriot of lands in Essex, and had restored him to the rank of Thegn, which he had once lost in his descent into drunkenness. "The king is hale, don't you think?" "He looks well, lord. He also looks confident." "He does, now that he is free of his mother. I thank God every day for that mercy. She is with the Benedictines at a nunnery she founded, Warewell Abbey." "Do the nuns guard her?" "No, the warriors do that. The king wisely has 6 men guarding her day and night. We couldn't have a fox out loose with the chickens, Beor." "Just so," agreed Byrhtnoth. She had tried to kill them both and snagged them in a plot which threatened to subvert the entire kingdom, and all because she was jealous of Byrhtnoth's reputation. "So Aethelric is dead, and you have done your duty once more. There are many others just like him, lord. Forkbeard has rested peacefully all winter in East Anglia with his fleet. Someone is feeding the bastard. Aye, and then we still have Olaf to deal with. He took the silver offered by the bishops, but that only buys us peace until this summer. So there will be war, lord. There will. It seems to me there will always be war, Byrhtnoth. There is always someone else to fight. But there is a thing I must ask of you, which must be done before the swallows return from across the sea." "Yes, lord?" "The king would know what this king of the Danes plans behind his walls and amongst the fisher folk of East Anglia. He would have you go to Sweyn Forkbeard and parley, find out what kind of man he is, who is giving him succor, and what he wants. The king fears more fighting because he fears for his kingdom if men are welcoming warmongering Danes to England. He would rather pay this Forkbeard to sail away than drench our soil with Saxon blood. The king wants me to go to East Anglia. Yes, take the men with you, my Hoth troop. Take them all. You are a man of reputation with a name that must surely have reached his ears after the fighting last summer. Be wary of him, though. Sweyn is no simple raider here for silver and fair fame. Men like him have been invited here, welcomed by some who would have Danes rule in the Dane law again. It is said he usurped his own father, Harald Bluetooth, and drove him from his kingdom. So he is ruthless and hungry for power. He picked the place to moor his ships well, for he is at Gibbons, and that place contains a royal mint where they have the king's seal to forge and issue coin. So he can make his own silver, his own coin? Yes, if he has the iron and silver, he can fashion his own coins to finance whatever it is he has planned. Whether that is to take the money back to his kingdom in Denmark, or make himself king here on our shores. Why would a king sail away from his own kingdom, freshly wrested from his father in a bloody war? Forkbeard wintered here with 40 ships, so they say, which is a long time for a king to be away. Speak with him, Bale. Find out what he is up to, and what kind of man we face. He might just kill me when he learns that I cut the legs and arms from his man and made him a hymna." "He might," allowed Byrhtnoth with a grin. "But you will fly the king's banner, so he will listen to you first." The news struck Byrhtnoth like a slap to the face. The dragon banner of Wessex. Byrhtnoth's chest swelled with pride. "You honor me, lord. You have earned it. Take the Hearth troop and find out what you can, for there is no news from East Anglia, not even from my old friend Leofric, who is Ealdorman there. He was a good man once. It worries me, and we must know what has happened there, for we have Viking fleets to the east and south." "I will go then, lord. But first I must go home to Brunnock's Tree, but I will not stay there long." "Do that. See your people, and then go to Forkbeard. You have fought hard since becoming a Thegn of Essex. You are a killer of Vikings, Bale, and we need you. I remember you lost your war horse last year. So, I have a gift for you." Byrhtnoth beckoned Byrhtnoth towards a stable door, and Byrhtnoth followed. Ealdorman had been his war horse, a magnificent animal, and Byrhtnoth had loved the horse. The wound of Ealdorman's death was still raw, and Byrhtnoth missed his silent companionship, and also the horse's ferocity in battle. Byrhtnoth grinned within the spade of his beard, and Byrhtnoth peered inside the darkness of the hay-strewn stall. A huge white horse bobbed its head, munching from a nosebag which hung from the wall. "He must be 15 hands," gasped Byrhtnoth. The horse was monstrous and pure white, except for the darker grey mottling. 14.5, said Byrhtnoth. "The horse is all yours, Byrhtnoth. He has been trained for war here on this farm. He will not frighten at the smell of blood nor the clash of arms. He is a warrior of God to be used in our fight against the Vikings. There is a saddle, tack, and everything you need. You have earned it." "Thank you, lord," said Byrhtnoth, staring at the beautiful horse and his snow-white mane. "What is his name?" "Hreath." It was a good name, which meant violent storm, and Byrhtnoth's heart swelled with pride at such a gift. It was a lord's duty to reward his oath men, to be a good ring-giver, but the horse was as expensive as a chain-mail byrnie or a magnificent sword, and Byrhtnoth did not have the words to express his gratitude. "And there is one more thing, Bale." Byrhtnoth raised an eyebrow, recognized in the wince of the Ealdorman's eyes that this next thing must be a pig's turd of a request. if it was worse than asking him to ride into the den of a notoriously savage Viking war king. "What is it, Lord?" "Take Thered with you. He remains with me as a hostage. Come over here. Don't skulk in the shadows." Byrhtnoth waved across the courtyard, and a young man with a long face and short dark hair approached with his head bowed. He was clean-shaven and broad across the shoulder. "I am truly thankful for your gift, but I'm sorry, Lord, but could you not keep Thered here, or send him to a borough for garrison duty?" said Byrhtnoth. His hand dropped to the hilt of his sword, and he crunched his teeth, the muscles of his face working beneath his beard. Byrhtnoth raised a hand and closed his eyes, acknowledging the difficulty of what he was asking. I know. His father tried to kill us both, and worked with the king's mother in their plots of deep cunning. But he has spent a long winter here with me. He has found the Lord, and recognized the error of his ways. He wants to make things right." Byrhtnoth leant closer to Byrhtnoth and lowered his voice. "I killed his father, Ealdorman Oslug, as you well know. It had to be done. So Thered is Ealdorman of Northumbria now, or he will be once the king ratifies his succession. Your friend Alfgar is Ealdorman in Cheshire, and to have Thered loyal to the throne in Northumbria secures the north. The king wants that. Enemies threaten us from across the sea, so to have the northern shires peaceful, loyal, and secure is vital. If he has found God and seen the error of his ways, then let him go north and take up his seat as Ealdorman. Not yet." The crag of Byrhtnoth's face crumpled into a frown. "I am not asking. Take him with you. Let him ride with the warriors. Let him prove himself, spill some blood. He will join my hearth troop of thanes. Offa is captain, but Thered is your responsibility. I want him experienced and humble, but alive." Byrhtnoth nodded his agreement, and scowled at Thered. He had no choice in the matter, but did not relish either meeting Forkbeard or the responsibility of minding a petulant Thegn who had tried to kill him less than a year ago. It was only spring, and already war and strife circled Byrhtnoth like crows above a battlefield. He would ride for Brannoc's Tree, his home, and only haven of peace. But then he must meet a Viking war king in his lair. Chapter 3. It rained the day Byrhtnoth arrived at Brannoc's Tree. It heaved across the fields in wet gusts from a pewter sky, and the spring chill turned Byrhtnoth's ears to stinging ice. He rode with the hood of his cloak pulled up, with the rain soaked through the wool to drench his hair and trickle its spite down the back of his byrny coat of chain mail and the padded leather jerkin beneath. Despite the ill weather, the people of Brannoc's Tree turned out to greet the returning riders. They bowed their heads to Byrhtnoth, who was their lord and Thegn, and waved and clapped at the rest of the column. The journey to Bucking had kept the riders away for a week, which, after the closeness of living indoors together all winter, felt like an age. Winter months were a bleak time of short days and long, dark nights, where folk huddled indoors and longed for the return of spring and the sun's warmth. Offa had disbanded the thanes of Byrhtnoth's hearth troop to return to their own homes for 2 days, before they would meet at